So I was recently making a video related to some arguments that I've been hearing because I went on. Let's start from the beginning. I went on and essentially took place in a discussion and some comments related to the debate between Kim Ham and Bill Nye. Uh, this was related to creationists versus evolutionists. Uh, uh, to Bill Nye, you might hear it was science versus creation, but that's not true. Not everything in the Bible was completely miracle related, but it is provable by science standpoint, most definitely. But that's really what I came into this video wanting to show. Is that these two worldviews have science to back them up. Isaac Newton himself said that science and mathematics was actually the study of learning more about creation, and that's the creationist worldview. Also, that same statement has come at times from Albert Einstein, who was Jewish, one of the smartest people on the planet. You may not hear about that much about Albert Einstein. That's maybe because evolutionists don't want you to know that. Same as evolutionists don't want you to know that there's actually two theories about similarly about evolution. One is one tree with many branches. The other is many trees with many branches, which that essentially means is each tree is a different species, and the branches are its physical changes related to. A good example actually is wolves and dogs. You may not know this, but they're actually the same species. They're not different species. They are the same species. Sometimes they can have pointed ears. Sometimes they can have flat ears. You could have a stuck out snout. You can have a close in snout. You can have all these different characteristic changes, just as a human being can have different looking eyes, different looking nose, different looking ears, different hair colors, different eye colors. There's even some humans who have hair across their entire body. It's all changes related to the appearance, not a change in species. What scientists will have you believe is that just a small change in the genome can essentially make a human a ape. Uh, let's just put it this way: why is a geneticist, if that is possible, ever done that? And the reason is it's because it's not possible. You can't change a human into an ape. You can't change an ape into a human. You can't change the genome to do that. You can't manipulate it to that point. It's unmanipulatable. It will cause death. But that's what scientists would have you believe. And my argument here really is not against science. Science is actually very accurate. It's very very found. My stuff is more against some things that Bill Nye had said, which were not scientifically accurate, or actually they weren't scientifically accurate at all, especially related to tree rings. But yeah, that's really what I set out to do because uh, after I heard lots of the people who actually took everything Bill Nye said for fact, I was like, oh my golly, this is actually damaging to the scientific community quite a lot. Which that I don't know if Bill Nye meant to do that. I don't know if Kim Ham meant to do that because both of them actually are very heavily known in both scientific communities. Um, they they're greatly important figures in both standpoints, and both their worldviews are proven by science, and that's one thing I hope to show you in this video. So I hope you enjoy. I'm going to cut into my talking in just a moment. But no fancy intros this time. That's just me talking the video. So I hope you enjoy. Hello, I know it's been a while since I've done a video, but, well, I've been answering lots of questions online versus creationists and evolutionists. Mainly, if you ever heard of the Bill Nye versus Kim Ham debate, you may recognize some of that debate a little bit, but one real thing that there wasn't much justice done to creationists on that debate. you hear a lot more from Bill Nye than you really do from Kim Ham, and Kim Ham really is an expert on this, and he does kind of hint at some of the things in the video that would prove that the creationist side is supported by science, but he doesn't get into tremendous details. Actually, creationist side is also supported by archaeology, and so it's a bit of evolutionist. But we will get started. First off, most evolutionists and creationists do believe that there was a mass extinction event roughly so many years ago. Creationists believe that mass extinction event could have been anywhere between 6,000 or more years ago. And then you have your evolutionists, which believe it was billions of years ago. Uh, there's a problem with the billions of years one, and will I kind of do want to get into that a little bit because if you do consider billions of years, one thing we do have for records nowadays that would suggest that that probably isn't true is the fact that you have your continental barriers, your shifts in the ground. Essentially, what you see on the ground is always rotated, so it goes into magma and essentially then comes back up to surface. And the speed of that actually doesn't dictate that the ground you are standing on now uh, could have even been around billions of years ago. It actually very well probably isn't that old. So generally speaking, any fossils that would exist today, according to that kind of science, would suggest that they would be turned to magma by now, which they aren't. So billions of years is probably not accurate, but many people do believe it is that old. Generally speaking, though, this doesn't disprove the fact that an asteroid probably did hit the Earth. It's very likely that an asteroid could have hit the Earth. Both would have caused a massive amount of water to have covered trees and mountaintops. Both would have had a tidal wave that probably would have washed all over most of the Earth. And both sides would dictate a lot of water pressure, which would have prevented lots of animals from swimming up. Actually, one thing that Bill Nye did mention is that one thing that does disprove the fact that there could be a flood is the fact that you don't see any of these animals swimming. Well, there's a real reason why you don't. Not all the fossils that we do discover nowadays did die to the mass extinction event. Many of them died to tar pits. Many of them died to sand pits. Quicksand, and that's what I'm trying to get at. There's many different ways that these animals died and were preserved. So you can't really say that, well, they were swimming. Well, not all of them died in that sense of matter. In many cases, with the flood and with an asteroid, what you can expect is that there's a very massive, probably wave that would have came over these animals. Massive sediment deposits would have been in that wave. It's kind of similar to what you see when you're at the beach. If you're ever at the beach, you're putting your hands and your toes and whatever in front of the waves. You'll notice that when the wave comes over you, it buries your foot. It also buries your hands if you had your hands in the water. Generally speaking, that's the sediment that's in the wave. It's being carried by the water, and if it was coming at a high enough speed or had enough pressure pressing it down, it would feel like a rock if it ever hit you at like a tsunami level or a rogue wave. So, considering that, the, yeah, you're not going to be able to swim up if you were hit by it. You'd more likely be instantly dead and buried in mud deep underneath the water and possibly carried by current for a time. So that's another argument people do make. You'll see lots of currents, and we do see lots of swirls of many animals clumped together. Their bones been crushed or other things has happened. The biggest one that I do know of where that did occur was the biggest mammoth site that we have in South Dakota. All the fossils were clumped together with all the mammoths, and in many cases we can't even figure out which bone actually went to where, which animal. We can't figure it out. It's just a jumbled up mess of bones. That's what we would expect to see, though, if there was a mass extinction to the level of either an asteroid or a flood. So, in total sense, the creationists believe the way we do because there is evidence to suggest that it happened. There's evidence to suggest that these events did instantly kill these animals and did actually catch the animals in the currents. Uh, but if you ever do know why those currents stopped, well, you have to also know that they were pounded under a lot of pressure of water. You don't expect the velocity to be staying constant. You expect that velocity to be slowing, and as that sediment deposited and was punched down enough, eventually you would find these animals deep underground. And eventually rock would form around them, and they too will be fossilized into rock. Their bones will be long gone by now. And not all of them were even actually turned into fossils. Some of them just degraded, and there's nothing left of them today. We don't have no evidence of that because they're gone. But we do know that even human beings after death do degrade, and so do animals, and eventually there's nothing left of them but dust. They weren't fossilized, is what ends up happening. The other thing that uh, these arguments really did come out with was the age of human race. Another reason actually why creationists believe in the Bible is because people lived longer early on in the Earth's history. This actually is because radiation wasn't as severe on Earth back earlier. The farther back you go, about roughly 6,000 years ago, what you would expect to see is if this was the case, we don't have much data, but we do have one data that does support this. In archaeology, you can't get anything in science off of this. It's only in archaeology. It's what we find left over from history, and the max we can go back to find evidence is 4,000 years ago, and essentially the only one we do have is in ancient Egypt. We do know the rich were able to live a max lifespan of 125 years, which is far longer than what we would expect to see given how many years ago that was. We don't have anything going back or after that either, though, because about going back 3,000 years, you had a lot of disease that would stricken places like Egypt, Europe, and altogether Rome. Disease would stricken these areas, and the max lifespan would be expected to be 20 to 30 years. Uh, yeah, that's why we don't see a lot of that. But what the idea is, and we do have scientific evidence related to radiation causing aging, is UV light coming from the sun specifically. It There's a lot of evidence that it causes aging in your skin and it causes aging potentially in your bone matter. Uh, so more UV light, the more wrinkles you can expect. The more damage to your skin, the more damage probably to some of your organs that do get exposed. But they'll eventually they'll kick out. You will no longer be young. You will be an old person for those reasons. Other radiations like gamma and others, they uh, they essentially cause other problems like cancer. They can cause mutations. They can cause radiation poisoning, which is when you get sick because you were radiated so badly. Uh, that that really is that. But what you would expect to see is if this was the case, is actually what you do see in the Bible. People were first living thousands of years at a time, but then slowly, about let's say 100 or maybe 500 years later, it was suddenly 700 years. Why was this the case? Well, it's because UV light, as we do even see today, it's like what you see with population. It starts out exponentially, but then it levels out. So slowly, the rate at which that you can visualize that change has decreased. Uh, what is causing this? Essentially, it's a decaying orbit. You either when you're orbiting a planetary body or like the sun, the major mass of our solar system, you either will have a slingshot effect, which is orbit that is just getting further and further away from the sun, or you're going to be getting closer and closer and closer to the sun until you hit critical and you're essentially going to be destroyed by the sun. Uh, what the Earth is in is what we would call a decaying orbit. It's getting closer to the sun, but it's getting closer so slowly that you can barely see it. It's like the continents moving closer and closer together to form a next Pangea continent. It's moving slower than what you can visualize, and that's the same thing going on with our solar orbits. The other major arguments that were presented by in these debates uh, actually came down to tree rings. Tree rings was an argument that I believe Bill Nye made when he was talking to Kim Ham at the Ark Encounter. He said that we have true rings older than how he viewed the Earth, which Kim Ham thinks it, at least what Bill Nye looked at, which he barely looked at anything. If you watch that video, he barely looked at anything. But to him, he was saying that the Earth is probably, according to Kim Ham, was 6,000 years old. I think it's probably close to 8,000. Some people think it was 7,000. We don't exactly know. We do know exactly that the first part of the world before the major mass extinction event occurred was only 1,000 years, according to creationists at least. If you talk to an evolutionist, that's billions of years, not 1,000 years. Essentially, what you will eventually, if you do enough research, you're gonna find out that no tree on this earth has more than 2,000 rings. The NOAA has analyzed, I believe, about 6,000 trees at this point. This is actually from 2016 study. The max rings they counted ever was 2,000, which means trees have only all the trees that you see around you, most likely all of them are younger than 2,000 years. Essentially, what happens is everything on this planet has a expiration date, and everything dies of old age eventually. And that includes plant life, that includes trees. They just die. They don't, unless they're petrified, like you have in a petrified forest, which can allow you to go back more than 2,000 years, maybe 4,000, give or take, even 4,000 years though. You're still in the range where you're okay. Even 6,000, you're probably still okay because it was, what's the best way to put it, after when creationists really do believe the mass extinction event occurred, which means it's possible that tree was alive if it hadn't died of old age by now. Other than that, there was some other arguments. Trying to think what some of those others were. I do have some of them listed around here, but they get more and more crazy when you actually listen to Bill Nye a little bit in that video, because he was really struggling actually in many ways to find arguments against what Kim Ham was telling him. But I think that was most of my arguments though, so I'll leave that there. When it comes down to creation. So I hope this at least gives you a broader sense of idea why creationists do believe the way they do, and also you understand why evolutionists also believe the way they do. Both sides actually do have scientific evidence that support their claims, but they also have evidence that doesn't. So you take carbon dating, for instance. Carbon dating does not support, well, it can never support actually a creationist, because creationists will believe that carbon dating is only accurate to about 2,000 years back, and actually even some scientists believe even today that are evolutionists believe it only is accurate up to 2,000 years back. And I'm probably one of them, but if you go back further, it exponentially increases to billions of years, and that's just not quite right, of course, is what we would say. But that is also related to how the world has changed, as in climate change. Climate change being a real thing. And actually, that's one other thing I did forget to mention that if you do believe in a mass extinction event, your definition of climate change is it's not. It shouldn't necessarily be that humans cause climate change because one thing that you do know, if you do know about the mass extinction event, is that 99% of plant life on Earth did die. If you believe in these events, 99% of plant life on Earth died, which means the carbon cycle was actually interrupted. What I mean by interrupted, it was changed. The carbon cycle isn't as efficient as it was on the first 1,000 years before the mass extinction event. If you're a creationist, if you're an evolutionist, the first billions of years of the life on Earth. And ever since then, it has slowly gotten less and less efficient because partly not we have desertification going on, which is actually a major environmental cause for climate change. Desertification meaning that there's even less plant life beyond the plant life that was destroyed after the mass extinction event. But then you also have human caused, but we only actually affect, from the last calculation that I did, about 2% maximum. That was in the 1980s. Nowadays, it's about 1% we affect because we also replant the plants that we cut down. So you also have the fossil fuels, which are also included in that calculation. But the major, major producer of greenhouse gases is actually from nature itself. It's not human made, but we do influence it, as many scientists do put. We don't change, however, the rate at which it happens. Well, we do change it, but it's very small. It's very, very, very small. But if you do know enough to be able to calculate that, you can actually calculate that. It's possible. And it is a theoretical calculation. It's not necessarily going to be 100% accurate, but it is a theoretical calculation considering the history we do know. Either if you consider the mass extinction or you don't. And there are people who will argue also that oil and fossil fuels, I've heard this argument before, it's absolutely ridiculous, but they say that the fossil fuels that we do have weren't created by mass extinction. Uh, I'm going to tell you right now that's completely false because plants dying are going to degrade into fossil fuels eventually. They died because of a mass extinction event, and that's what created the very first major amount of fossil fuels that we do have on our planet. So, is that evidence? Oh yeah, that's definitely evidence because you take from the last 2,000 years, that rate doesn't account for the actual amount of fossil fuels we do have. You would find that if you use that rate, a mass extinction event had to have happened to kill off a number of plants very quickly to actually end up with the reservoir of fossil fuels and oil that we have today, like coal and oil is what I'm referring to. So yeah, I really do hope this was definitely educating. Don't listen to everything you hear because Bill Nye said a lot of rough things when he was at the Ark Encounter and also during his debate. And I didn't necessarily cover all of them. I kind of covered the biggest ones, but there are a lot more, and some of these debates went on for hours at a time, so it was very difficult to watch. And some people said that it was not a very that it was a very non-argumentative debate, but if you ever do watch it, you'll notice that Bill Nye looks very flustered, especially when he was at the Ark Encounter. He was extremely flustered at the Ark Encounter, and it was very visible because he would raise his voice, and Kim Ham would have to try and change the subject oftentimes, which is probably why Kim Ham didn't get a lot out of his mouth because he couldn't prevent Bill Nye from just talking his mind. That's pretty much all Bill Nye did at the Ark Encounter. Well, this was a little bit of a different video. I do hope to do some more videos later, some on video games and others on other things. The next one I do kind of want to do is related to some of our culture norms. I do want to talk about the flags culture right now because there are some interesting things with flags, and there's also a huge reason, video game reason wise, that you may have heard about related to especially the recent Spider-Man game that actually might catch your attention. So if you do watch my videos, not everyone watches them. But I hope you enjoyed. I will have another video up as soon as I can.